Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Megillah, pages 14 through 20, Daf Yud Daled. Here the Gemara is concerned with the issue of Hallel, saying Hallel on Purim. In fact, we don't say Hallel on Purim. The Gemara wants to know why, and it offers two basic reasons. One, because we do not say Hallel over miracles that took place outside the land of Israel, the diaspora. And since the miracle of Purim is a Shushan-based miracle in the land of Persia, not Eretz Yisrael, so it doesn't justify the recitation of Hallel. Alternatively, the second answer is Kriyatazu Hallelya. The reading of the Megillah is the functional equivalent of the recitation of Hallel. And this makes a degree of sense, in the sense that there is a liturgy which we say on the various holidays, being grateful to God for our salvation. On certain holidays, let's say Hanukkah, so we have the Hallel in which we thank God for the salvation. The Megillah tells the story of that salvation and serves the same purpose. A third explanation appears in the Gemara, and that is the Hallel tells us, Hallelujah, Halu Avdei Hashem, that when it comes to the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, we were no longer slaves to Pharaoh, we were no longer Avdei Paro, rather because we had our freedom, we were Halu Avdei Hashem, the servants of God. But in the case of the plot of Haman against the Jewish people in Persia, yes, the plot of Haman was foiled, but we were still Avdei Achashverosh, servants of Achashverosh, not exclusively servants of Hashem. Therefore, the Hallel is inappropriate on that day. Tedvav 15. Vayavor Mordechai, Amar Rav Shevir Yom Rishon Shel Pesach B'Ta'anit, that Mordechai fasted on the first day of Passover, the first day of Pesach, in the year in which Haman had hatched his plot. Now Rashi explains that on the 13th day of Nisan, the plot was arranged, the Goral, the Pur, the lottery was done to pick a date to kill the Jews, and that fasting was a 3-day fast on the 13th, 14th, and 15th, on the 14th, 15th, and 16th, and on the 16th, towards the end of the day, was when Haman was killed. So the holiday of Passover, including the Seder, was essentially done away with that year in a time of emergency. Ted Zayin. Aseret b'nei Haman, v'aseret tzrich b'menu b'neshima achat. The person who is reading the Megillah, the Bal Koreh, is supposed to recite the 10 names of Haman and the word aseret, the word 10, in one breath. One should not take a breath in between. Why? My time, kulu ba'adad einaf nishmatu, because they all lost their lives in the same moment. Yud Zayin. Tanya, Kriyat Shema Kechtava. So there's a machloket about how one can read the Shema, the language in which one can read the Shema. One approach, Divrei Rabbi, is you have to read it in the Hebrew. The sages say it can be done in any language. My time at the Rabbi, why does Rabbi say it can be done only in Hebrew? V'hayu, that the word v'hayu means it must be done as it is written, with no tinkering, no changes, and certainly a change of language is a significant act of change. Rabban my time, why do the rabbis say that it could be in any language? Shema v'cholashan shata shemea, because the word shema means to hear. Say it in any language which you can hear, which you can understand. Rabbi Nami Haksiv Shema, but Rabbi also has to deal with the fact that the Torah says Shema. So Rabbi would say that means you have to be able to hear that which you're saying. It must be audible. A silent reading of the Shema is insufficient. It must be audible to your own ear. Yudchet. Kara Seirugin, if you read the Megillah discontinuously, meaning in a choppy fashion, a few verses now, a few verses a few minutes later, another chapter an hour later, Yatza, you've satisfied the obligation to read the Megillah. But the other Rabbanan Seirugin, the rabbis in the academy didn't know what the word Seirugin meant. It's an uncommon Hebrew word, and they were not proficient in it. So what happened one time? The yeshiva boys in the academy of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi heard that the maidservant in Rebbe's household was telling the rabbis as they were coming in discontinuously, a few at a time, how much longer are you going to come in and say Rugin? And then they understood that's the meaning of the word Seirugin. It means a few here, a few minutes later, a few minutes later to that, but not a steady flow. Now, how could it be that the rabbis didn't know a Hebrew word and the maidservant of Rebbe did know this word? The answer is because the rabbis were not speaking Hebrew as their vernacular. They spoke as the common language, Aramaic. And so their Hebrew, while strong, had its lacuna, had its missing elements, whereas they actually spoke Hebrew as the spoken tongue in the household of Rabbi. He was a Hebraophile. And so even his maidservant, who was not necessarily the most educated, knew some Hebrew words that the yeshiva boys themselves did not know. Yud Tet, 19. So how much of the Megillah must one read in order to satisfy one's obligation? Rabbi Meir Omer Kula, you must read the whole thing. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Me'ish Yehudi, Rabbi Yehuda says from chapter 2 when Mordechai is introduced into the story. Rabbi Yossi Machar Dvar Ma'ele, Rabbi Yossi says it's from when Haman is introduced into the story. So it's a question of whether it's chapter 1, chapter 2, or chapter 3. The halacha is we have to read from chapter 1, which means the whole thing. This is important because people sometimes will come late to the Megillah reading. They'll come a few verses in, and technically speaking, they cannot satisfy their obligation by listening to the Baal Koreh under those circumstances because they missed the beginning and you can't read it out of order. So what must they do? Go to a later reading, or read it themselves. Daf Chaf, 20. Hakol kesher likrot Megillah. Everyone is kosher among the Jewish people to read the Megillah on behalf of the general public. Chutz mechershot v'katan, except for the general three categories of people who are exempt: the cherish, the deaf mute; the shoteh, the deranged person; and the katan, the minor who's not at the age of mitzvot, not of bar bat mitzvah yet. Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's possible for a katan, a minor below bar mitzvah, to satisfy the obligation on behalf of the community. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda cited in a braita. Katan haiti v'karita l'tmalam Rabbi Tarfon was kind of I was a little boy below bar mitzvah, and I was the Baal Koreh. I read the Megillah in the presence of Rabbi Tarfon and the other sages at the town of Lod, at Lida. Amrulo, so the sages responded to Rabbi Yehuda's story. En mvin ra'inu katan. We're not allowed to we can't accept proof from a minor. So even though now you're an adult, but you're telling a story about something that happened when you were a minor, well, minors are not qualified to testify. So therefore, your story is of no halachic consequence. And so while no one really doubted that what he was telling was the true story, they rejected it as a halachic premise. And in fact, we rule that a katan should not read the Megillah. It should be done by an adult. Everyone have a great week.